Your neighbor with the same quality with which you'd love yourself. And then he told us how to pray, and he boiled it all down into one little prayer that takes half a minute to recite. 30 seconds. 30 years ago, I decided to spend the rest of my life learning how to pray that. It has taken me 30 years to learn how to pray a prayer that it takes 30 seconds to give. I could boil it all down into one phrase, and that was simply in the middle of that prayer. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. The reason the camps were born was because out of that prayer. After praying, thy kingdom come, I began to wonder what heaven was like, and so the Lord just gave me a present of a Camp Farthest Out, and I found the kingdom of heaven is there. So we don't have to die to find out what heaven will be. I'm not going to tell you, though, what you'll find. When you die, you're going to find you'll be with the persons you want to be with when you want to be with them. At that identical moment, they'll want to be with you. And you'll find that the ideas will come to you in perfect sequence and order, just the ideas that will bring inspiration to those you're with. And in the third place, you'll find the supply resides in the need, and if you have a real need, the supply will come in, if it's a real need. If it's an imaginary need, like most of our needs are, they may not always come in. Now, stepping out to live that way, I have found that by tuning in the morning to that kingdom of heaven and stepping out and trusting it. Well, it so happened that I got a telephone call, and from Bishop Anderson. He said the bishops of America, the Methodist bishops, are having an annual meeting here. They're having it in Minneapolis. And there are 4 of us here taking lunch together. Will you come over and take lunch with us? Well, I knew that in the kingdom of heaven, I'd be with the persons I wanted to be with when they wanted to be with me, and I went over, and we were in the kingdom of heaven. Here is the senior bishop of the Methodist Church, Bishop Anderson. He said, your book, The Soul's Sincere Desire, saved my life. I've memorized the first chapter. I used the 6th chapter for my commencement address when they made me president of Boston University. And here I want you to introduce you to the Bishop of Europe. There's the Bishop of Europe. Well, I'm glad to meet the Bishop of Europe. And here's the Bishop of Liberia, black as the ace of spades, St. Clair, but his soul is as white as his name. Bishop Anderson said, the highest honor I ever had is when I was asked to ordain Bishop Clair. And here is the Bishop of the South. Well, there they were. I was with the people I wanted to be with. And then we talked. And this was 30 years ago, and they were old enough to be my father. And then when it was approaching 3 o'clock, I said, the Hamlin relays start at 3. I have a team that'll be there. I'm careful not to let my religion make me a prima donna and say, the Lord told me I didn't have to come here, and you just have to do your best. They're depending on me, and I must be there. Then those bishops, they just practically grabbed me and put me back in the chair, and they said, look here, young man. Athletics is as important as religion. We 4 men reach thousands of ministers, and we have only got half of what we want. And we want you to talk fast now, and we want you to stay another hour. Just let that go. Well, then I said, now, Lord, now this way, when you live in the kingdom of heaven, you just pray, thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, not mine, or the bishops, or this track team. I just said, Lord, now what should I do? Should I stay? And a strange peace just filled me. I made this discovery. When you're in the kingdom of heaven, God speaks to you through the peace that will come to you. But the way Bishop Raines used a strange method, perhaps I shouldn't reveal it. He has a room in his church as a hennepin before he became a bishop, and he'd go into that room, and he had the pictures of all the men who'd influenced him most, the men he considered the most saintly living men. But he had a difficult problem. For instance, shall I accept the call to this church? I don't know that I want to. Should I not? I think maybe I shouldn't. And he looks at those faces, and they all frown at him. Then he'll say, I believe I'll accept it. And they all smile. Now, how those faces change, I don't know. But I know how the face of God reflects in my heart. And if I feel terribly conscientious that I must go, I'm sorry, Bishop, I must go. But that peace came, and I said, it's all right. And I sat there. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time. And then I rode into the Hamlin Field at 4 o'clock. I saw Wesley Tennis, he's the president of the YMCA, and my champion half-miler, was bouncing around on the track, warming up. And I said, Wesley, how did the first race came out? Oh, coach, he said, they just called it. Everything's just an hour late. We haven't had any races yet. Why, if I had rushed back and had sat there for an hour, twirling my thumbs, thinking of those poor bishops, I wouldn't have been in heaven. I said, I got some new ideas coming across on my car. I'm going to give some of the new men chances in some of these races. I won't wear out some of you older veterans so many races. And we won all the 4 relay races. We broke all the 4 records. They gave us 4 great big statuettes. And when I go by the trophy room in Macalester College, I say, hi, bishops. 4 gifts given by those 4 Methodist bishops that enable us to come and beat that Methodist college in all those races. Well, Sherwood Eddies. By the way, the son-in-law of Bishop Anderson, he has a wonderful big family. They all are married, wonderful people. And the son-in-law of Bishop Anderson is in charge of the Sherwood Eddy journeys over the world. And they're anxiously trying to get me to go with them to get into Russia today. They can get into Russia this year. Now, Sherwood Eddy's son-in-law came to see me. He said, I'm at a college way down in Georgia, and I wish you'd come and speak there sometime. It's a teacher's college at Carrollton, Georgia. I said, well, I will be speaking in Chattanooga on a certain date, and I'll have a few days free after that. Is that anywhere near? Well, yes, it is. Well, if you take the night train after your talk and get in, you can get in, what's the name of it? York, I think it is, York, Georgia. Spend the night there, and then take the 7:30 bus. That'll get us to Carrollton in time to the chapel talk, 10 o'clock. All right, that'll be fine. So I made all those connections, then went down at 7, I didn't wait till 7:30 for the bus. I went down to 7. I thought maybe there may be a little lunch counter and get a sandwich, but there was no lunch counter. And I said to the ticket man, when will the bus come in? Oh, about 11:25. I don't want the 11:30 bus. I want the 7:30 bus. Oh, we're on daylight saving it. It left half an hour ago. Well, I was in the kingdom of heaven. So the Lord had made that bus go. So I went to the phone and called up Kerry Smith, his son-in-law, in Carrollton. Said, I've missed the bus. I'm going to hitchhike. And so maybe you better get a pinch hitter of your faculty to take my place if I don't get there. And so I went outside the city and put up my thumb, and a young man picked me up, and he was just way out of sight of everybody and everything, and puff, and he said, a flat. He got out. He said, the spare is flat too. I'll have to limp back into town. And so that left me stranded, and stranded, and stranded. And finally, a little car came along, and a little old man, and he took me in. And his father had fought in the Civil War on the southern side. My father had fought in the Civil War on the northern side. So we were fought the good old Civil War over again as we were going along, and came to the hill. And his little Ford began to go puff, puff, puff. He said, I don't know if we can make these hills. My battery isn't very strong. We had nothing but hills. Well, we had ended the war and reached the next town, and he said, this is as far as I go. I went outside that town, and I held up my thumb and held it up, and finally I said, Lord, it's 9 o'clock. I didn't arrange this. I'm putting myself utterly in God's hands, and I'm not the necessary down there. The man to take my place probably give a better talk. But Lord, if you want me, you've arranged the thing, and if you want me to get there, you'll have to arrange the transportation. And after a while, a car came along, and an old couple were in it, and they took me in. I said, you're an answer to prayer. And the old lady said, we believe in prayer. My husband leads singing in the churches. And his father had fought in the Civil War on the southern side. My father had fought in the Civil War on the northern side. Presently he said, have you ever heard, have you seen Jesus sung? I said, no, but I'd love to hear it. He said, would you prefer I would sing bass or tenor? I said, either. Well, she sang a strange falsetto, and they joined in, and it sounded just like a calliope. And when we passed the schoolhouse, I'd put the window down, and the youngsters would all stand and watch the calliope go by. Well, after a while, we reached Buchanan, and I saw I had 20 minutes to go 20 miles, and he said, this is as far as I go. So I rushed into a telephone station and said, yeah, I want to talk to Kerry Smith. I'm here at Buchanan, 20 miles away. I'm going to hire a taxi, and I think I'll be there on time. Hung up. And he turned to the dean and he said, yeah, he's at Buchanan. Just 20 miles away. He says he's going to hire a taxi and he'll get here. And the dean said, if he'd said that from any other city in Georgia, I'd have believed him. But I used to live in Buchanan, and that's the one town in Georgia where they don't have any taxis. Well, I still live in the kingdom of heaven. And so I found out that, and someone said, maybe the shoemaker can take you there. So I went to the shoe shop, and he was pounding away on his shoe. I said, can you take me down to Carrollton? I reckon I can. After I get the mail, I said, when do you get the mail? He said, it's 10:30. Well, I got to be there by 10. Well, maybe Mr. And he said, there's a man named Mr. Frost, 10 miles away that has a taxi. And a man sitting there with his shoes said, I think I saw Mr. Frost getting in his car just a few minutes ago. I said, where could I find him? Well, he might be over at the post office. So I hurried over to the post office a block away. Anybody seen Mr. Frost? Somebody took, that southern style, took me out and pointed, there he is, going in the courthouse. So I yelled, Mr. Frost, and he stood paralyzed, and I ran another block. I said, could you get me down to Carrollton? I reckon I can after I see a lawyer in here, and he went in. He came out very quickly, and we got in the car, and I said, can you make a mile a minute? He said, I reckon I can if the constable doesn't catch me. I said, did your father fight in the Civil War on the southern side? He said, my two uncles were killed at Gettysburg, and so my mother wouldn't let my father, he was the youngest one, go to the war. Oh, I'm so glad. This way I have a taxi. So just for my sake, he stayed out of the war. But at any rate, I said, how much are you going to charge? $3. Well, I'll give you 3.5 right now because I'm going to be in a hurry when I get out. I said, how do you, he said, the thing that brought me into this town, there's a Negro built a cottage, a little shack, on the edge of a rich man's land. And the owner said he'd always protect it. He would never take it over, but he's died. And the wife says that she's going to just take it over. Well, it occurred to me this morning at 9 o'clock when I was thinking about things that I knew a lawyer there in the courthouse that would take the case for nothing and could save that easily. He said, I didn't know I was going to get a fare, though, going back. Now, all the way these things fit together in heaven, at 9 o'clock, when I said, Lord, you will have to arrange the transportation, he put in the head of that man a good deed to go to that town and save that Negro. And here we were. Meanwhile, down at Carrollton, the students are all getting ready, 700 students in the chapel, to get out their history books and read while some old dry college professor is going to give them another choir talk. And then, but they also took notice when Mr. Smith got up and said, Glenn Clark is at Buchanan, 20 miles away. He has phoned that he's going to take a taxi and get here. The dean says there are no taxis in Buchanan. But Glenn Clark believes in prayer, so I'm going to ask you to sing an extra song, and I'm going out up that aisle, and as I walk out that door, I will expect to see Dr. Clark. As we came riding up, I grabbed my suitcase, jumped out. Just then Terry Smith came walking out the door. I started to run. He said, "Don't run. They're singing Climbing Jacob's Ladder." When I walked in with Mr. Smith, all the books closed. When the angels came to Abraham, Abraham wasn't any more startled than those students were watching this angel come walking in and come in on some way that where there's no transportation. They sat on the edge of their seats. They were as responsive as the Camps Farthest Out, and I don't know how many lives were changed because I had to go through all that perambulations to get there. Met a lot of men whose fathers had fought on the Civil War, and it cost me less than the bus would have cost me. And there you are, the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. Ben Johnson, one of my dearest friends, president of a great lumber company in California, had a salary of $25,000 a year and is just worried and sick about finances all the time. Oh, I tell you, be poor and you won't have to worry. Afraid he might lose it, something might happen. And he asked me to be on the board of directors, and my goodness gracious, to come out and sit on there on the board of directors. I said, no, but I'll be on your board of spiritual directors. So he never went to an important meeting without a long-distance phone call. They often came from Stockton, a city where a lot of lumber deals are made. And one day when I was, one evening after I'd given an address in Norman Vincent Peale's church at our retreat there, I was in Prince George Hotel, and a phone call came, and this is Ben Johnson in California. The doctor says I have cancer. Please arrange so that you can come and see me. Oh, I said, I'm all filled up every date, but I'll just pray for you. Well, that is the year we were to have our first Camp Farthest Out in Hawaii. The Browns said, if you'll come down to Omaha and meet us as we're going with our car, just take a day extra, and it'll save you a lot of money, and we could, riding across the continent, we'll read the Water of Life, the most inspired book I've ever written, and nobody ever reads it, and those who do, I just love to be with them. So if they were going to read Water of Life, I'll go out of my way to do that with any folks. And so we rode, and when we reached Cheyenne, I said, I just figuring up our mileage, and we won't quite reach San Francisco the day before we're to leave, but we're not leave till evening, and we could just as well, we could push us there. So we probably would stop at some little town this side. And they said, yes. I said, now I could see Ben Johnson. I don't know where he lives, but I think it's Stockton. So I called it long distance. No Ben Johnson in the telephone in Stockton. It's just a business center, not where they live. And I said, isn't that too bad? We have the time. He wants us. And here it is. And I just there again, I said, Lord, if you want me to see Ben Johnson, you will have to tell me the name of that town. Well, we rode 600 miles the next day. The Browns go about anywhere between 80 and 90 usually. And we reached there at 6 o'clock. And I said, I feel like relaxing by going to a movie. A little bit of a town. Do you remember the name of the town? What? Winnemucca. A little bit of a tiny town, and they had a moving picture and a different picture every night because everybody went, I suppose, and they didn't have enough to have the same movie repeated. Had a wonderful movie the day before and a wonderful the day after, but this night all it was roughshod, a Western. Well, the Browns didn't want to go to a thing like that, and I didn't run breaks, but I said, I want to change, and I'm going. So they went with me. 3 beautiful ladies, young ladies, got on a stagecoach. And they said, we want to go to Sonora. Sonora, that's the name of the town where Ben Jonson lives. Actually, God, you'll find him down even in hell, he says, isn't it, down in hell? You'll find that God, he'll always be ahead of you. If you just live in the kingdom, he'll be there. I could have gone into a billiard hall and somebody'd come up and said, say, the town you want to go to is Sonora. Why, there it was, Sonora. We got back about 9 o'clock that night to a motel, and I phoned. It was 8 o'clock out in California to Ben Jonson. His wife said he just hopped up and down for 24 hours with joy. He never even heard of Roland Brown, whose power of the spiritual power as a healer, in healing is greater even than mine. And we prayed with him. And, you know, months later he wrote us, the doctor has found my cancer is cured. Now that's his living in the kingdom of heaven. You'll be with the person you want to be with, and you want to be with them. And I went down to see Dr. Carver, because everybody that had ever seen him, used to tell me, there's one man you must meet. So one day I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me by return mail, I was praying that you would write me when your letter came. Please come down and see this workshop. I call it God's little workshop, where all these miracles happen. Well, there I arrived, Saturday noon. Oh, my beloved friend, you came the wrong day. My infantile paralysis victims come all afternoon, Saturday, and all day Sunday. Can't you wait till Monday? I said, no, I'm to speak in Atlanta Sunday, but I'll go to lunch, and he says, I tell him to come unless it rains. I said, I'll go to lunch, and I'll come back and see how the land lies. And I said to my friend, I know it's going to rain. He said, I don't see any clouds. Now, I don't get dogmatic like that, but I'm going to tell you something. I start every morning with a prayer that I'll be in the kingdom of heaven, and Dr. Carver would go out at 4 every morning and talk to dear Mr. Creator. When heaven meets heaven, God will arrange something. He wouldn't bring me 3,000 miles for nothing. And it was raining so hard when we got back, why, we could hardly get out the car, and no one came but the little group that wanted to meet with us. And I put that conversation in that little blue book that was described by Margaret last night. And over 300,000 copies of that's gone out over the world, and I get letters nearly every week from folks whose lives are changed by just listening to that conversation. The next day, Sunday, all his victims came, and they all got their treatment. So God even arranges that. If it had rained and we had met, I'd said, Lord, that's your way of saying Sarge Carver and I were not to meet. He has some strange occult faith of kind that he's never told me about, and I have some strange modernistic something or other that's all off. But we didn't. We did nothing modernistic and nothing occult or anything else. We just met with Christ, and he was there. And whenever we went into God's little workshop and we had a prayer, and he has told me that his discoveries have come 3 times as fast ever since we had that prayer. Writing to Harry Emerson Fosdick's church, once I wrote and asked him to pray for me, and I was on the train when it reached, the letter reached him, and I knew when it reached him. The whole train was filled with light. I'm here to proclaim that George Washington Carver was the most spiritual saint of his day. After he left, I put it down as Rufus Jones. I want to say we have lived in an age of saints, more saints, I think, living saints, than any other time in history. When you go down to the Frank Laubach and Muriel Lester and go down the line, you'll find wonderful saintliness available. A white-haired man came through the train and picked me out to talk with me. I described that in 2 books. And since that the seed was planted in me, I have found on my journeys across the continent. I'm led to tell my story to just one person. Coming out here on the plane, I avoided the seats where ladies were because I knew they'd get out their cigarette cases and smoke. I tried to sit down by some man, and chances were at least 50-50 he wouldn't. And I sat down by a young soldier boy, a Navy boy in Navy suit. And he got out a Testament, was reading it, and I got out a book on my manuscript about the fairy stories, and I was writing ideas down. And finally he looked over there and he said, "Are you a writer?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, by the way, are you preparing for the ministry? He said, oh, no, no. I just read this to kind of get in tune. So I said, well, I'll tell you. I found that as and I talked with him. And I told him that I only told my story to one person. And he said, where are you going? I asked him where he was going. So I was going to Long Beach, and I told him I was going to talk in Los Angeles on Sunday in the Hopelands Church. But he's going to leave the day before that out for the Pacific. And I said, I said, what are you going to do in the Pacific? He said, it's a top secret. And then I said, you're dropping in the well when you tell me. So he told me. And I want to say that it worried me a little bit. Not that there's going to be a war, but there's some big things that this nation's trying out, and I don't like some of those top secrets. He said, I'm going in for 2 years, and when I come back, I'm going to try to find where your Camps Farthest Out is, and I'm going to go there. Now, there is a life that may expand like that. You don't know. I got on a train once, and a white-haired man and a white-haired woman were weeping. Or rather, she was weeping, and all their children, grown children, were weeping as they put them on. They went into a compartment. As I went by the compartment, acting on this guidance, I just stepped in and threw away and said, I beg your pardon, but if you have any special need, I'd love to pray with you. Get out of here, he said, just like that. And I went out. Next morning, I was shaving in the washroom, and this old man was kind of walking around behind me. And he said, I beg your pardon, but are you the gentleman that spoke to us in our compartment? I said, yes. Oh, I'm so glad. My wife has just been begging me to find you and have you come in and pray with us. And I found that she was under the sentence of death. And I could tell them about heaven and what they can do with their wish multiplied and powered by infinity. And I brought peace to them, and the Lord led me in there. So there's something else happened. I was on a boat riding from Boston to Portland, Maine, and I hadn't told my story to anyone. I went down to the dining room, and there around the square table were 4 of us. The one on the right and the one on the left had nothing to say, but the young man opposite me he just talked all the time. He said, have you ever been on the Maine coast before? And I said, no. Don't you think it's beautiful? I said, yes. Where are you going? I said, I'm going to Monhegan Island. What are you going to do there? I'm going to be the guest of a writer. Do you ever write anything yourself? And I said, yes. What did you write? Oh, The Soul's Sincere Desire. You know what impressed me most in that book was the golf illustration. And he went right ahead and told me all about that book. Later in the day, later in the morning, in the evening, I was sitting on the deck, watching the sun go down, the stars come out, and this young man was pacing around looking for somebody. He said, oh, would you mind talking with me? I said, let's walk the deck a while. So he said, I'm chaplain at Amherst College. I have to address the students once a week, and I don't know how to hold their attention. Could you help me? I think I ought to. I've coached athletes for 20 years. I suppose you think your first duty is to make them good. Why, certainly, I'm a minister. That isn't your first duty. Well, what do you mean? Why, your first duty is to make yourself good. Oh, he said, that's interesting. You're right. And your second duty is to make them happy. But you can't make them happy unless you can show them the bases of happiness, of goodness that your happiness is based on. He said, go on. Well, he talked for an hour, and then he said, he took hold of my lapel of my coat and looked me straight in the eye. Now I know why I'm on this boat. I came down to Boston in the North Station to get a ticket on the train, and an unseen hand just pushed me through that station down to the wharf, and I've been wondering why I got on a boat instead of on the train. And now I know you've given me just the help I want. If you're ever near Amherst, I wish you'd talk to one of my boys. I said, what's your name? He said, I don't have a card. My name's Arthur Kinsaving. I said, I won't need a card because I can remember that. How can you remember that? It's a difficult name, like most people say. Kinsaving? Why, half the problems I'm called on to solve are between kinsfolk. Kinsaving. Well, 2 years went by, and I was on the Maine coast again. This time I was invited out there to address a group of ministers who vacationed in Maine. And then we had a lunch, and then I addressed them again in the afternoon, and out of it has grown the Camps Farthest Out in New England. So those ministers went home and began to establish these camps. Opposite me at lunchtime was a tall man. He said, I'm chaplain at Dartmouth. Oh, you know then young Kinsolving at Amherst. Oh, yes, yes. Yes, I sure do. But he's not there anymore. An old lady said he's at Trinity Church, Boston, Phillips Brooks' old church. Oh, I said, that's wonderful. I consider Phillips Brooks the greatest minister that ever lived. And so he's assistant pastor in that great church. Oh, not assistant pastor, he's head pastor. Oh, how that church must have degenerated to have a young chap like that. No, it's grown since then, said the old lady. And then the chaplain said something that just thrilled me. He's especially developed a power of drawing young people. The Wellesley girls call their bus that takes them to church on Sunday the Kinsolving Special. The editor of Atlantic says it's become a byword. They've never had anyone that can draw young people like he does. What we talked about and prayed about. And the old lady said, yes, he even draws them from the old South Church across the way. And the chaplain said, don't talk so loud. The pastor of the old South Church is down the next table. Don't I know it? He's my son-in-law. Now, if I put into a book just the conversations I have had that way, but I don't have to. I'm having them right here. And we're going to have another one today, and the Lord's going to be in it. These ministers of the Nazarene Church, three of them here. One of them is from London, the great evangelist. They want to start this prayer movement started through all that church, for they just feel just exactly as the Church of God did that had a group of us CFOs lead them in Kansas City. The minister said, we want to confess. Now this, I'm not confessing them. They're a wonderful church, but I'm telling you about the Church of God. That we must confess that we're a preaching church. We're not a praying church. We're going to divide into prayer groups, all of us ministers. And the leaders are going to be three Camps Farthest Outers that know how to pray. Glenn Clark, Marcia Brown, Roberta Fletcher, and Grace Curry, women leading these ministers. And the humility of that, the power that can be put into a church by these men alone can do it without any of our help. But I want your prayer, that we can pray for them, because that's our service, is to pray for all the churches that want to go deeper in prayer, for that is what's going to save the world. When all the churches learn how to pray with power. Now, I found ideas come to you when you're in tune with God. Of course, those were the right idea, coming in the sonora and the different things. Are you in the right place to meet the right people? You can't explain it, but that's as near as I can define heaven in action. Here is the here are ideas. So I sat down and spent 12 summers writing an article for the Atlantic Monthly, and I sent it to the Atlantic, and they sent it back. And I sent it to Harper's, and it's still back. And then one day a boy asked me how I prayed. Now, you know how to pray, but you don't intend to write books about it. I was a coach. I was a teacher of English. I'd written a textbook on a short story. But this boy asked me how I prayed, and out of love for him, not any desire to get in the Atlantic, not any desire for fame or glory, I went into an inner room and sat down and said, Lord, you take this pen, and you tell him. Because it's an intricate way. I don't pray just like, it's a kind of a new way coming through of somehow just stepping into the sermon on the Lord's Prayer, and just praying that one thing, thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and then believing it. Now, this is where my change in this. I had prayed that before, but this is what I learned. Now, how can you put it into words? But this is what I learned. If I telephone for groceries, I expect the groceries to come. I telephone, ask them to deliver a watermelon, and that watermelon would be there that afternoon, and we put it on our ice chest. I asked the Lord to send his kingdom of heaven down here today, and I walked out, and of course it won't send it. But I quit that. I said, I walked out, and I expected to be with the persons I wanted to be with. I went over to the bishops there, and I expected him, the Lord, to send me the right idea at the right time, and the right idea was, stay here for another hour. I was in heaven. If I just thought it out myself, I said, no, I thought this out. I promised myself and promised those men I'll never let them down. I'm going to leave here and get there at 3 o'clock. Now, my stepping into this man who said, "Get out of here." Something led me, because of that old lady that was going to die, needed somebody that could tell her something that not a one of these others had told her. All the doctors said is, "You're going to die out in California." And the children said, "No, we're sorry, we don't have the money to go out there. We won't be there when you die. So you have to just weep and sob here while you get on the train." So something called me in those things. Now, you can't explain it. And if I hadn't been in the kingdom of heaven, I could have gone in and said, "Can I help you?" And they said, "You're an intruder, get out of here." And I'd have been an intruder, and I should get out of there. There's a whole difference there in the way you do it. My wife caught this. And one day I came home, and she said, "You know, I had a strange feeling this morning. I prayed that we could be in the kingdom of heaven." And I called up 3 old ladies on the phone. And the first one said, "Oh, I don't know what you called me up, why you called me up, but I've just been desperate. And your voice, you've given me just what I needed." Another one was wanting to call her up. And I didn't know what led you to call me up at this time. And she just acting on those. On the other hand, she could have done it just on it and been a nuisance. A bunch of little high school girls, classmates of my daughter, came in one night, and one of the little rascals looked up a telephone directory of Mrs. Stevens and dialed it, and a perfect stranger, and said, "Hello, is this Mrs. Stevens?" "Yes." "Do you wash?" "No." You dirty thing." Well, now that was, the Lord didn't prompt that. I bet that lady was mad, whoever it was that did that. But it's very true. She didn't wash. Dirty thing. Well, now, you see, you can do things from different angles. You can do the same thing, just call up somebody unexpectedly. Well, I sat down and wrote this, and I was surprised. It's better than anything I'd written before. I read it to a group of people the next day, and they said, "That's too good just for us. Why don't you send it to the Atlantic Monthly?" Well, I knew the Atlantic didn't accept religious articles, and so I didn't bother to do it. I had it printed as a little booklet, which was too valuable not to distribute. To sell for 15 cents. They kept telling me, "You ought to send that to the Atlantic." And finally I said, "I'm going to send it." But now I know they won't accept it, because the Atlantic isn't like the Reader's Digest in those days. It would take things, the best things, from something else. But I mailed it, and to my amazement, this is what they wrote. They will accept it. But they practically said, if you'd sent it 1 month earlier, we wouldn't, or a month later. We're accepting it because Dr. Kersaplake of the Divinity School, that great theologian of the Harvard Divinity School, has sent us an article on prayer, which we believe in. An article on prayer in which he said prayer has never accomplished anything. No one is ever healed by prayer. That's all bosh. Prayer is a fine thing in the ritual of a church. Well, the editor wrote, we wanted to put this in, but we wanted to have someone take the other side. We didn't dare ask any minister we knew here in Boston. We prayed they'd just write a perfunctory, duty-required article. And then your article came like wildflowers pulled up by the roots, with a rich loam of the forest still clinging to them, all this vital experience behind it. It made people really believe it. You know, the world will listen to an authentic spiritual experience. And I tell you, those students at Carrollton, and because I've seen students, a man will come in and give them a grave address, and they'll say he doesn't mean anything of it, and they just go and read their book. But you get Brownie Hall in there in a college, they put their books aside, and they'll drink in everything he says. So we decided to have him speak again next 3 o'clock tomorrow, so you can have another chance at him. But I want to say this. That's all the difference in the world. And so they took my article, and even there I was guided in delaying everything. Otherwise, I've never written any books. The result is, after a while they said, well, I went over to buy a copy when it came out in August 1924. And my wife said, why didn't you get 2 more for our mothers? I said, I'll go over tomorrow and get those. And they were all gone. I went to the next bookstand, they were all gone. I went to the next. And then the man stopped me. You know, the Atlantic Monthly is a drug on the market. We used to have to send them back. But everybody's calling for them, and we find they're all sold out in the city of Los Angeles. The story magazine and the moving picture magazine and the detective magazine, they go like hot cakes. And then the editor wrote and said, your article sold the whole issue out immediately. The first thing, the biggest experience we had in 50 years, you've got to expand into a book. So I did, and then I got letters. One was from the South Pole, second in command of the, Larry Gould, second in command of the Admiral Byrd expedition, the man who accomplished more than any other one on these journeys, according to Admiral Byrd. He said, twice the Byrd party's life's been saved because I carried your book lashed to my dog sledge, and I use it to get tuned in. And before I get in my sleeping bag, and one night I said to the men, get out of your bags and move to a ledge over yonder, 100 yards away, and how they did grumble. But the next morning there was a chasm down to the center of the earth where 60 men would have been. And never would have returned. Now, I didn't have anything to do with that, but I feel the kingdom of heaven, sending ideas at the right time, coming through that book. The fact he looked at it the right way in the right time. He wrote, here the Atlantic Monthly, I'm going to find where you live, and when I come back, I'm going to give you the copy, this copy with the stamp of Little America upon it. But I won't give you one until you give me an autographed copy, and I want to say I've got that copy with the most marvelous statement in it, testimony of how God can look after men in danger. When you step into the kingdom of heaven, I won't say that it always works every day just like that. You slip once in a while, and you're not always in the kingdom. And sometimes you might think you're in the kingdom, and you might not. But I find that 9 times out of 10, that things work out. And sometimes you're dealing with people that don't like the kingdom, are so out of tune with you that you can be in the kingdom of heaven, and they'll do everything just as they did with Jesus, hung him on a cross, because he's the only one going in the right direction. One day I was on a streetcar, and I put in a token and got a transfer, and then I got on the Selby Lake car and put in another money and sat down, and here was the transfer sticking up in my like a sore thumb. Now, why did I pay an extra fare when I didn't have to? Well, maybe to give my wife a chance to laugh at my professor. Now, that's a rich company, and I'm not so rich. Why did I do that? Now, you can't fret over a little thing like that. I wasn't in the kingdom, maybe, when I did that. The next day, I was to give an address at this Hamlin University to the whole student body on how to put inspiration into writing. I finished my short story class, went out and got on the streetcar, looked down at my new suit I put on for the occasion, and then I put my hands in my pocket, and to my horror, I found I had not changed anything but the suit. And I knew that conductor would be putting me off, and how would I ever get that speech? I stood there on the back platform. Presently he came out and he took the fare from the other laboring men. And then he looked at me and he said, I got your fare, and he walked in. I said to myself, if I were George Washington, I would have to say, I cannot tell a lie. You did not get my fare. Then I looked at his uniform, the same uniform the man had the day before, and I thought how nice it was for this company to take my fare when I had it and not to embarrass me when I didn't. And I have found that when God closes the door, and if you keep clear, he'll have a sign on that door pointing to a better door. Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have become president. He lost the senatorship, and because of that, the door opened to the presidency. Well, so living in the kingdom of heaven has its ups and its downs. And I can think of so many other instances where we I was forced back upon really using this. One year, for instance, I was coaching the track team, and the president said, all we can give you is $250 for the general expenses of the season. And I knew at Carlton and Hamlin they had $2,000 instead of $250. So I said to the manager gets a letter by doing some work and arranging meets and so on. He was mechanically minded, and he hated to write letters, but I hated to arranging the schedule. So I said, I'll take over the arranging the schedule, and you use your mechanical ability to fix all the broken hurdles. And he said, I'll be glad to. And I arranged meets. And the strange thing was They always paid us more than we really needed when we were on the trip, and we had money when we came back. And then we'd have to give up the relays way down to Des Moines. And the coach of the University of Minnesota called me up and said, the attorney of the Rock Island and I are good pals, and he's been twitting me because we never use the Rock Island. Well, it takes 2 hours longer, I told him. But he said, supposing I get a special car, and instead of charging you $25 round trip or $35, just charge you each man $5 round trip. And I said, but I've got to have it filled. Well, now we've got it all filled, but we have room for 7 more men. That'll be just two relay teams, including myself. And I've called Carlton, but the Carlton coach is mad at me, and he won't even answer. So what you could do for me? Why, goodness, for $5 a round, why, almost nothing. We went down to the relays. At the end of the season, we had more wonderful meets, more trips for the men than any other college in America. And you know how much it cost us? It cost us $25. So when the treasurer wrote out a check for $250, I said, I'll let me write out a return check of $225, and you keep that to pay salaries for your poor, broken-down professors. Now, I have found if a challenge comes and you don't know how to handle it, turn over and let the God be the manager, business manager. Don't have any concern, and if the other man is supposed to be managing that place, you step in and put your kingdom method and let him do something else. So that's what I like, is have somebody that has that spirit of the kingdom of heaven in charge. One reason we send Tick and Margaret around on the Fanner Bee things, because that is kind of a wild kind of life to just live on an automobile and go as a God, but we're trusting them to find and open the right doors and so on, and there's something is going to expand. There's going to be another chapter pretty soon in that. Find somebody that, well, I'll tell you, Arthur Brisbane, who had things in all the, was it a columnist? In all the newspapers of America. 50 years ago, he wrote, big companies are looking for men to sit in front of an empty desk and look out of an open window for 4 hours and think straight. They'll pay $50,000 for the man, and they can't find the man to fill the place. And so there's a man in my Bible class had such a long face. After 3 years, I couldn't stand any longer, and I said, what's the matter with you? He said, I'm in the wrong business. I've gotten into the railroad business when they're in the Depression. I'm just a water boy for a defunct railroad. I said, what is your official capacity? He said, I'm assistant to the president of the Sioux Line Road, and it's in the hands of a receiver. I said, I suppose the rest of the company are unhappy too, and he said, they sure are. And you're not making them any happier. I'm sure not. Is your family happy? Well, perhaps during the daytime, but not after I get home at night. So I said, now see here, why can't you start living in the kingdom of heaven just as if things were success? That things are going to be the right thing come, and just try to put this into living flesh and blood. Well, he said he'd try. And he worked out a system. Might be a good plan for any of you to follow. He arranged to take lunch with a manager named Holmes, manager of a insurance company, who was completely in peace with God. They took lunch every day, and that just changed A.N. Williams. A year went by, and he came to me and he said, there are 13 railroad presidents meeting in Chicago next week, and I understand they're considering me for the presidency of a railroad that connects all the railroads. We should pray about it. The week after that, he came and he said, they unanimously elected me president of that company. But before I reply, I want you to promise you'll come down next summer and go with me in my private car with all my executives and help them to catch what I've bought. I said, I'll promise. One by one, those executives told me that he had accomplished more in 5 months than the other president had in 5 years. Years went by, and he was made president of the Lehigh Railroad. Then he's made president of the greatest thing of its kind in the world, the Western Union Telegraph Company. And when I was in Washington, in New York, during the Second World War, I phoned the building where there's 10,000 employees, cover several city blocks, and the answer was, you can't get in here. You can't get in here without a government permit. We're the nervous system of the world right now. I said, well, let me talk to the president, the secretary of the president. And she said, oh, you can come up. He'll give you half a day if you want it. And he did. He took me all over that place. By the way, the little girls on roller skates go skidding around and get the big, and go to another desk and give them to be sent in. And they were, I want all the different floors and everything. He had me use the new invention they had, telephoning my brother-in-law in Chicago, where not only but you can write, and that will be written before I measure telephone. Then he had me lunch with all the vice presidents, and they were all spiritual men. I said, now, if you're the nervous system of the world, I'm organizing, trying to gather the praying forces of the world. Supposing we shove a lot of our prayers down through you and out through this nervous system to the world. They said, you have our permission to. Later on, I was invited to go to Washington with a group of big executives. I think they were coming there to see if they couldn't do something to squelch the New Deal, but they had me come because they thought I'd pray. And I knew that not any of them knew me, and they wouldn't want me to pray. I just sat there as an nonentity. I was an executive, sure. I was president of the McAllister Park Publishing Company, about 12 or 15 employees. So here those men, all of them 1,000 of employees. And then this Mr. A.N. Williams got up and he said, Glenn, ever since I've had that prayer with you 20 years ago, I don't start the day until I've had 40 minutes with a Bible in one hand and a spiritual book in the other hand. I don't start the day until I get right on the beam. And after that, the other executives would listen to me, because there is a man that spoke with authority. Now, there it is. Just pray that little prayer, thy kingdom come on this earth, and your will be done on this earth, just as it is in heaven. Oh, that's wonderful. Why, this is heaven, to look out there, the wonderful scenery, to look at the wonderful scenery of souls here gathered from states all over the nation, to find that that book called the Bible is such a marvelous thing. If we just can find out the impress it's made on this life or that life, then it will become contagious and reach our lives. Heaven. Let us close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen.